Hi, this is the third part of a three-part series that I talked about, and just a warning that if you are a happy witness or an active witness right now that is not interested in looking at apostate material, this is probably a good time to bow out, um, because the first two videos were all about how I lost my faith, and I looked to strengthen my faith, and the questions led to doubts, and the doubts led to me losing my faith, but I still had respect for the governing body. And during the course of this next video is where I lost respect for the governing body. So I set out now to start reviewing the record. And like I said, when I started this search, I still had respect for the governing body. I wasn't looking for just trash, or again, I really wasn't interested in looking at anything hateful or sarcastic or what I call, apostate. I wasn't looking for anything that was classified as apostate. I was looking for paper trail. I wanted to see quotes from the literature. I wanted to see the history of the Watchtower. I wanted to follow the facts. I wasn't really interested in personal opinion at this point. I wasn't interested in what other people had deduced. I was interested in finding things for myself. So I was very selective about things that I looked at, and I ended up broadening my horizons as things went along. But I did find out enough that I did lose all respect. One of the things is I always thought I was pretty knowledgeable on Watchtower history. My grandmother was a Jehovah's Witness, and she was an active, faithful Jehovah's Witness her entire life. And so between her stories and the stories I grew up with, I figured I knew the history pretty well. And turns out I don't. I maybe 1% of it is what the Watchtower lets you know about. And so finding out the real history of the Watchtower Society and the men behind it, the presidents, and etc., was a little disconcerting, to say the least. I ended up losing a lot of faith for them. And one of my things that I was holding on to in this regard, as far as holding on to the respect, was I really didn't have a clear motivation for why they were doing what they were doing. I still figured that they loved Jehovah, and there was something going on. I had no faith in them, but I didn't see them as anything evil. And to be honest with you, I really still don't see them as out and out evil per se, but I no longer see them as the holier than thou class that I once did. And a couple of things that kept coming up were, before I get into that, let me talk about this reference. The Paper Trail kept recommending this book, Crisis of Conscience, and it is by Raymond Franz. I don't know if I can get that there. And he is a former governing body member. And I kept seeing a lot of references to that and a lot of recommendations to it. And so before I decided to get into it myself, because like I said, I wasn't looking for anything really apostate-y. And I know that's not a word, but I like to say it. And so I started looking at reviews on Raymond Franz himself. And it was interesting that the only negatives that I could find on Raymond Franz as a person were from active witnesses that didn't know him. And they would say bad things about the book, but it was really word of mouth because they had not read it for themselves. They were responding to stuff they had heard, other people had heard. And so I wasn't taking those reviews very seriously at all. And the reviews that by the people who knew him, both in and out of the organization, were very positive. Apparently, he was a very kind and generous man, and very loving, and was not at all an angry ex-witness. Although in hearing his story, I think I would have had a little anger going on. But people who knew him before and after he left the governing bodies also say that he was not a vengeful type. So I ended up getting the book, and I haven't read all the way through it. I will be very honest with you. However, what I do get from this book is really just facts. And yes, there's a lot of painful things to read, and a lot of stuff that isn't in the greatest light, but it's not manufactured. He's got letters and text and publications and etc. And he doesn't let himself off the hook any more than he lets anybody else off the hook. He was a governing body member for 9 years. His conscience was bothering him while all this was going on, before he ended up deciding to leave, and he is not any nicer to himself than just because it's him. And one thing that I've noticed too is when he has, particularly people he knew firsthand, if he has things that he has to say that are particularly negative, he does point out the good qualities of that particular person. So as to it's like he doesn't really want to trash anybody. So I it is harsh to read, I have to tell you, but I don't see it as overly biased. One thing that I do recommend that you read this if you are curious about the inner workings of the governing body. However, if you are an active or a witness that is, if you're undercover in the fact that you are aware that the governing body is not who they say they are, and you're stuck still because of family or whatever reason, and you decide to read this, I do recommend that you get it in a PDF format because they are available. Change the name and hide it on your computer. Because I know once upon a time, through reading the reviews and the history of this book, before actually reading the book, that at one point it was a disfellowshipping offense just to have it. So the current governing body, is very afraid of this book. So I do encourage you that if you are going to read it and you are in a position where this could be detrimental to you, to get it in a PDF format. The other thing that was brought up a lot, that in my readings, was that the Jehovah's Witnesses, or more importantly, I hate to use the term Jehovah's Witnesses because the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society is the issue. And they are known as Jehovah's Witnesses, but it is not the witnesses that I'm having issue with. It is the governing body, the organization itself in Brooklyn and in Pennsylvania, and it is not the Jehovah's Witnesses. So please, if I do say Jehovah's Witnesses, I do not mean to be attacking anyone personally. My statements and everything are directed solely at the Watchtower and Bible Tract Society. So one of the things I kept reading when I was looking was how Jehovah's Witnesses were continuously being called a cult. And I grew up with the literature, and it'd been addressed through the magazines before that we are not a cult. And so I finally broke down and decided to do some looking. And actually, the first thing that I looked at when I was still going through my question stage, and it was Margaret Singer. And she has a YouTube video on a conference. I'll put it down, the link down below. And because I was in such a doubt stage, I think was why I was open up to listen to things. And she struck home on a number of points. And this, again, added to the fear that I was already going through with having the doubts that I was having. And but I decided to learn more. I didn't decide to learn more at that time because I was still a little bit afraid. But as I started breaking free, I did start researching it. And there are a couple of books that I do recommend. And if you're going to start yelling at me that the Witnesses are not a cult, I want you to provide evidence to the contrary and not the Watchtower literature, because I already know what it has to say. So if you really want to get into a debate about cult versus not cult, I do recommend that you read some secular literature. Now, there's a couple of books that, I'm sure there's more, but there's a couple of books that I actually have that are non-Jehovah's Witness. So they don't specifically mention Jehovah's Witness at all. And one of them is How to Respond to the Cults, and it is by Herbert Beck. And it's a short little read. And you can see the table of contents, nothing regarding Jehovah's Witness in there. So again, his name is Herbert Beck. The other one that was being recommended a lot was Stephen Hassan, Combating Mind Control, Occult Mind Control. Now, he was a former Moonie, and he writes a lot about the Moonies and how he escaped the mind control cult. And I do want to show you here that the table of contents, that there is nothing in there about the Jehovah's Witnesses in particular. And I will show you also the index in the back. We'll start with the W. And there is nothing in there on the Watchtower. There is nothing under R, so nothing sneaky under it like Russell or anything like that. And here's the J's. So nothing about the Jehovah's Witnesses. So if you're interested in reading some outside literature about cults so that we can have a discussion about it, I'm more than happy to discuss it. But if you're just going to spit up what the Watchtower says, I'm really not interested in that. So during this course of my looking, I found the paper trail, and there's a lot of stuff all the way down to Russell. And again, don't take my word for it, take a look. And a lot of things finding in reading Crisis of Conscience and just finding out the actual history of the organization. I still don't know their motivations, and even though I personally believe that they are a cult, which is an added little bonus to the situation. But again, like I said in my first video, things can be overcome. Humans are very adaptable, and we can conquer many things that we don't think we can. But I still was having trouble with the motivations. If they're, I do believe they're a cult, but I still can't see them sitting up there in their little tower going, how are we going to get them? And I still don't fully understand the motivation, but it has been suggested that the Watchtower in Pennsylvania is really the controlling factor, and I'm really not going to say whether I believe that or not. I want to do some more research before and find out, again, really for myself rather than hearsay, but that idea does tickle something that kind of makes sense to me, and that the governing body are men who have devoted their entire lives to this organization. And now they're in a very respected position. Granted, they don't make a lot of money and they're not well known to the public. You can find out who they are. But in Bethel, they are very well respected. So that's a position that they don't, that would be hard to give up. They don't have money of their own, but they do have access to some very deep pockets. I would be that broke if I had access to those deep pockets. And they travel very well. And so there's a position of power, respect, and a luxurious way of living that all of a sudden is now a motivation thing. And just being in that position alone, leaving the Pennsylvania question out of it, just being in that position alone, it would be very hard to separate, or very hard to give that up. Plus, devoting their whole lives into something they believe in, even if they get there and find out it's not what they thought, it still would be a challenge to accept that their entire life had been wasted or a mistake. So there's a lot of little reasons just like that, just that make it make their little position too comfortable to leave. And being imperfect men, they are prone to those kind of the power corrupts kind of thing. So even if they're spirit directed, which I personally no longer believe, they always claim to be imperfect men. So being imperfect men, they are prone to some of the pitfalls of being human. So I do think that they may not have an ulterior, you know what I mean, motive, or sitting up there plotting. There is a lot of, they're stuck in the policy. They're stuck with the positions that they are, and they just haven't had the power to leave. So, I'm still researching that myself because I would like to know more, because it is a hard thing to kind of get your head around, the motivation behind the governing body. Why would they do what they do? Why it almost does sound like a weird conspiracy theory, but when you break it down, it does start to make sense. So anyway, that's all I have on that. I will let you know if I find anything out more about the governing body, but those are my suspicions for now, and that's really all I have to say.